probably everywhere.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Here we go.
You should raise your microphone a
Yeah,
bit, Wolfgang, so that the air doesn't go.
we are on air,
Okay.
guys.
I'm waiting to see the picture on YouTube to make sure we're really on air. And now we're
Yeah,
on. Okay, so welcome everyone to our, is it fourth or fifth podcast from the LeSS Day Europe conference, in which we are introducing you guys to our great speakers. And today we have not just one, but two speakers. It's Robert, say hi,
Hello.
and it's Wolfgang.
Hello.
Yeah, so and today we picked a topic that we haven't actually touched at all in our previous podcast, right? So if you've been watching the previous podcast, we touched on the topic on the general adoption of LeSS and the challenges on the way. We've talked about team responsibility. We talked about other stuff, but we actually haven't discussed at all LeSS huge. So let me just dive in right into that. So I leave you guys with a microphone. So I'd like you to introduce yourself, like who you are, and answer the question like, first of all, how did you find LeSS? Like what brought you to LeSS? Let's start with Robert. He seems like the guy who wants to go first. I know.
Yeah, look, I look like
Yeah.
So my name is Robert Briese. I'm an agile coach since around 10 years now. I started with actually SAP development and configuration, and then moved, as many do, into project management. Obviously, I guess I was a pretty bad project manager. That's why it helped me into my journey as an agile coach somehow to reflect completely different about the job. And I've worked with many companies that try to introduce Scrum. I did my first adoption in like 10 years ago, mostly I was working initially really with one team. So what we like to call the one team less, and which is basically Scrum, and which it's even like hard to get it working correctly. But I was lucky really to have a cross-functional team and it worked pretty well. And at one point, I joined a company that was already in the process of growing, and they do the usual multi-Scrum teams thing, where they set up different Scrum teams, each with their product owner, and have other people who try to coordinate between them. And I just didn't feel like, it works great. And by the time I did a lot of research and I went to BUS training in 2013, I think. And I was pretty impressed. I was blown away about what I've learned then, and I thought I know a lot already about Scrum, but it made me really rethink Scrum again. And then I went to Craig's course in addition to that, and I started experimenting with those ideas. And this is how I basically got to introducing LeSS at at that client. I pretty initially figured out that it's like people didn't like those names. Even Scrum was something that they will, find something very, difficult to grasp. So we never used any kind of names for that. But I tried to use the principles and help them basically adopt. And we did something that is actually not recommended. And that's actually what my whole case study describes, is we gradually introduce less in a organization, right?
Okay.
And while this is fine for less huge, you should never do this for less. You should do like all at once type of thing. If
I'm sure we'll dive into that in a few minutes to learn a little more about you. But what I'm currently hearing, and this is actually a very common pattern that I hear over and over in this podcast, is that people don't call the less adoptions less. They just do it undercover. And if you ask people who've been to these adoptions, they probably would not even know what less is. So this is a very interesting thing I've seen. I'm not sure if it's the same with Wolfgang. So who are you and what brought you to LeSS and what's your LeSS story, if you may?
Okay, it's actually, so hello everybody, I'm Wolfgang Steffens. I'm born in Germany, but I live in Finland. And it's actually interesting, never asked me this question before, and I would be saying that I did not find LeSS found me. It was 2005, Greg and Bas had just obviously found each other, and then they came to Nokia. And at that point of time, Nokia Networks, we were really like experimenting and figuring out this new way of working. The Agile Manifest was out, and we heard about Scrum. And I was the head of program management function in that time. And then these two guys came, and then they offered their ideas, and I said, "Go away! Yeah, this will never work here, because the project and the program managers are the ones who are really capable to get something done here. Without them, nothing will work, and you want to get them away." Yeah, so that was really a clash of culture and of thinking, of mental models. However, since it was happening anyway, so I have been spending time with this, and actually in this way I grew up with LeSS. I mean, at that time there wasn't LeSS yet, so that was 2005 when this whole thing started, and then we had experimented a lot in our business unit. And then I also was heavily looking at this and trying to understand, what does Agile mean? What does it mean in reality? And so on, understanding the values and the principles. And then I gradually became more and more a so-called Agile coach. And then I was later on then full-time in this community, and as a full-time coach within Nokia, I was then able to coach also these LeSS organizations which were just starting. And yes, we have seen quite a lot of interesting things there, and what happens in reality to some events, to this construct in LeSS huge. And it was also so that typically in such a big company, it was so if you only have something with one or two teams, that wasn't worth anything. Yeah? So you have to have at least 5 or 6 teams. Otherwise, you cannot call yourself a product line. You are just nuance to the company. Yeah? So therefore, it has to be at least the setup of many teams, or less huge. And we had several less huge cases, and some other organizations of the size of 1,000 people tried also other things, and then actually they said, okay, it doesn't work, and then they went back to less huge. So that was quite an interesting time. And also you have to understand that at that time it was in Finland, we were really, I would say, the early adopters there, and together with other companies we have formed a consortium, and we have really open-minded exchanged our ideas and challenged each other and challenged our views. And also that was together with competition. You have to imagine this. Yeah, this was the competition, like Ericsson and Nokia together, sitting side by side, exchanging ideas how to develop products. That was an absolute fantastic time at that point. Yeah, and we were really having a good time there. And that was basically how I came to LeSS. Yeah, and since I don't know more, I would say I don't know any other way how to do it. That's for me the very natural way. Then of course I also use this in my LeSS adoption, which I was then leading there. And yes, I had the same as Robert had mentioned, that they basically the head of this organization even was going so far and said, we don't do LeSS here, period. even though they did less, but they didn't want to be tied to this framework for one reason I still can understand.
Understand. Okay, so this was a brief introduction, or not so brief introduction, from Robert and Wolfgang. And another guy on your screens are Yevgeny Labunsky. He's my partner from Scrum Ukraine. I'm Alexei Krivitsky, but we're not going to talk about ourselves today, right? Because we have two super interesting guests, and both of them have published their case studies on LeSS. So we really would like to know more about that. So let's dive into LeSS. So guys, let me ask this question right away. Like, there's like one Scrum framework, right? Like Scrum is just Scrum framework. Why on earth are there two LeSS frameworks, like LeSS and LeSS? And also why their names are so actually funny or not really clear which one is which? Anybody of you can answer my question?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, Alexei. As a trainer, I'm sure you know that, you teach people that Scrum is a barely sufficient framework,
right?
Based on empirical process control. That means that it has just the necessary rules that need to keep to start you going and to experience agility.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the idea was how to make it barely sufficient and keep all the so-called polluting elements that you don't need for LeSS out of the definition of LeSS. So that's why you have the LeSS definition with additional rules that are not in the LeSS rules. So if you count them up, if you go on the LeSS side and count those, you will see a total of 28 LeSS rules and additional 13 LeSS rules.
Yeah, I'm right now showing actually on my screen the LeSS framework without the huge add-on right on it. So what is the key difference between it, guys? So when usually people apply LeSS and when usually people apply LeSS, is there any like difference between it?
And which one is cooler, right? For a coach or a Scrum Master to be like, I'm doing LeSS huge. I'm doing huger than the LeSS huge. My LeSS is bigger than your why and what?
Well, actually, if I answer this one, if you need LeSS huge, first of all, you have my deepest empathy that you're not capable to do this only with less. So because you will have more fun, yes, and as a coach in this way, yes, you can say you have more interesting areas, you have more complexity there, so it gets even worse. Even though LeSS already in a normal organization is already complex enough. Yeah. I think the issue what I always teach in my classes is that at some point of time LeSS is not enough. So there are these companies, there are these products. I know, like I said, I'm coming from the telecom world, and very many of the products in the telecom world they require 500 people, 1,000 people all together. Not all developers, but still all together to really get this kind of monster elements basically out in the market. And the question is, how do you do this? So how do you do this? And that I think is the answer what Greg and Bas try to find, in a way. And as we know that the all LeSS and LeSS huge is not designed on a blueprint. It is grown. It is empirically grown through the experiments. And so we actually figured out that, okay, what works and what doesn't work. And in this way, we said, okay, at some point of time, there is a border in which the people are not anymore capable to understand. So we come to the cognitiveness of the people. How much can you remember? How much do you know? And that basically is, I think, the hurdle. And if you are then beyond this hurdle, then you have to think about bigger. So if you have a product and you really have 30 development teams, so you have about 250 people developing a product, not all the others. So then, well, how do you organize this? This is the question. And then again, how do you organize it in the spirit of Scrum, in the spirit of the manifest for agile software development?
Okay.
And that, I think, what the guys were trying to figure out.
I have a very good question about this. If I have 30 development teams building one product, of course that's gonna be some cognitive like blockers, yes,
Load.
and I have to build it somehow. I can manage or understand what's going on out there, and the question is, right, what does it mean area in less huge, and is it any rules in building areas? Because most of the people, when they have 30 development teams, they just start building it like a mobile app or a back end, a front end, core, platform, something like this. So they start building the blocks that is like in mind of development, right? I'm the one who learned development a lot, and in any development book it says build the system based on its layers. And if you have a lot of teams, the people start thinking in this way, right? And start building the teams around the layers. And if you have 30 teams, it's very easy to build the layers there, right? Just start building them around components, call it area, bam, you have less huge, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
So
or no?
So like looking at the picture which you're currently showing, Evgeny, right, on our streaming, like what differs less huge from less, or guys, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is this definition of requirement areas, right? This like less within less huge, right? So I would like to hear from your actually experience, right, from your case studies, like how big were the areas, like how many teams were in one area, how many areas did you have? And maybe you can give some examples of what were these areas, like other components like Evgeny says, which I really doubt. If not, what were they? Business lines, domains, or just anything.
So
yeah, please go ahead.
I can start maybe answering Evgeny's questions, and then Wolfgang can answer your question or comment to that basically, or giving real examples. Basically, a requirement area is nothing else than a grouping of the product backlog items. But the important thing is to group it in that way that is done from the customer perspective. And not from a technical perspective, as you said. So that's the logical thing that many people would do, many managers would do. I think this is related to our local optimization bias, a cognitive bias that thinks we want to do things more efficiently and improve the different technical parts, which we can also see basically immediately. But the idea in LeSS is actually to do this grouping from that perspective that we want to optimize for, and that's customer value. So you do the customer perspective, and you think about how to manage the product backlog in a way that makes sense from a customer perspective, so that you basically manage areas of small products in itself. And that's the way how I see it, that you have basically smaller, less adoptions within one product. And that's why it fits very well with with your findings, Alexei, that you have basically less in parallel happening in less huge. In addition to that, so you have, of course, the same roles as in LeSS, but you have area product owners. And it's the requirements areas that you mentioned. But the events are still there. You have one common sprint for the product. It includes all the teams, and it ends with potential shippable product increment. And yeah, maybe Wolfgang, you want to add to that?
Yeah,
or? example.
Yeah, this is something I would really like to highlight, and you cannot stress this enough. That basically so that you integrate in the end over all these requirement areas into one product. This is the idea, into one potentially shippable product increment, how we call it. So and this is a real challenge. And if you would think of that, okay, we have maybe instead of 5 requirement areas, we have 5 different small products, then you miss the integration. And then the question is that who is doing the integration? And then you have again this kind of like heavy prison ball on your foot, and you're not anymore as flexible as you would be. So you have long feedback cycles and all the bad stuff what you can imagine is happening there. So therefore it is really important to understand this is one product you are having, and you have sliced this into several parts in a meaningful way, i.e. customer-centric way, so that in the end of each sprint you integrate into one product. This is really, really important.
Okay.
And then how you define those requirement areas, as Robert already said, it's very important to think them of a customer-centric way. Look it from a customer point of view. And there are ideas like what is your workflow, for example, or are there customer domains? Is this kind of thing really meaningful to slice this? And of course, you need to understand whenever you divide something, you actually violate the overall optimization goal. You will not be as good as if you could have everything in once.
So can you say less is more for global optimization than less huge in this case?
Well, that is the question is not
avoid less huge as much as possible.
Yes, basically you should avoid less huge. You should also avoid less. Yeah. I mean, if you can do it with one Scrum team, then do it with one Scrum team. But if you have to do more than one, okay, then do more than one. But as bigger it gets, as more chaotic it gets. You have more parties. You have more things to look at. And you have more communication challenges. What you have typically, then the companies do also multi-site in addition to this, just to make it even more fun. Then it's getting really, really, really challenging.
Okay. So let's be a bit more precise. What big really means? Like how big is big? Like you a telecom industry, right? Where you need hundreds of people. Like from your recent experiences, right? Like, what is the size of the area? Like how many teams are in? How many areas have you seen working together? And like these kind of things.
Yeah. Well, there is the magic number of 8. Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to go for this one first? So let's maybe clarify the magic number of 8. Yes.
Yeah, it's in the book. I know, but like if I mention it to any product owner who I know, she would say, "Oh my goodness, I can barely work with one team. How on earth I can go with 8 teams? Yes. Fuck off, right?" So how do you like? First of all, why this number? Well, why this magical number 8? And second of all, how realistic it is in your experiences, and what are your experiences?
Okay.
Thank you.
So basically, the magic number 8 comes from this, that there is a recommendation in LeSS that you have about 4 product backlog items per team per sprint. And the recommendation in general is that you have 2 to 3 sprints ahead this kind of fine-grained items. So this means that we have per team 12 items. Now, on the other hand, we know that the average person has, the average product owner typically has capabilities to rank or prioritize about 100 items. So if you now divide 100 by 12, then with some rounding, you come to 8. And this is where the big number of 8 comes from. Now, I have seen some product owners which are not capable so much, so they cannot handle this. So maybe there is a limit of 6. And maybe others, they are absolutely cool in their job. They could handle 10. So this number is not like written in stone, but it's a guideline again. And so if you are really a super product owner and you have delegated a lot of the work to the teams, then you can handle also more. but typically we haven't seen that too often, if at all. And the interesting part is this, that I have seen requirement areas of 2 teams, which is certainly not okay. That shouldn't be the case, but it was done for political reasons. There is politics in the companies, so that was not possible otherwise. And then, like I said, typically the requirement areas are up to 8. And we had in Nokia, we had cases, we had like 30 teams, and then we had like 5 requirement areas.
Could you give
over multiple sites.
Could you give us an example of requirement area from any company you worked with?
Well, like, is it a domain? Is the business line? What's a good customer-centric? Yes. Yeah. What would be examples from the different maybe domains or industries which you've been working in?
Well, I mean, it depends a lot on the product itself. So you have to understand what is your product, and of course the product should be defined also from a customer-centric point of view. But let's take a simple example of insurances.
Yeah.
So typically everybody has an insurance. And now you could say, okay, maybe you have a vehicle insurance, or you have this private liability insurance, and those kind of things. So those could be areas, for example, in my mind. So if you have an insurance company, and then you could say, okay, the one is focusing everything on private liability, the other one is taking care of everything of vehicle insurance, and the other one is taking care of life insurance. So that would be, from a customer point of view, and then everything is included there.
Okay. Robert, your experiences?
I mean, this is really, really hard questions. In some cases...
I'm sorry, guys. But, this is how this podcast works. We ask very hard questions, and you need to do some magic.
The reason why it's so difficult is basically you might, as Wolfgang explained it, you might have different view of it. If you ask different people, they might have different understanding of what the product actually, or what a product is. In some cases, it can be more easily. I think in Wolfgang's example, you would understand that there are different type of insurances, and you would expect that you might want one insurance but not another, and so on. In some other cases, there is not such a clear grouping from the customer perspective. For example, if you think about the self-driving car, one hardware component, or one like software and hardware component, could be a product. Even like some functionality in the car could be like a product already from the customer perspective, or the whole car could be the product, and that would be a less huge case. And if you talk about, let's say, the software itself, and you see the product as the ability to have the car self-driving, then it's pretty difficult to slice it up in different customer perspective. And that's something that I know, like, a lot of customers are struggling in, and sometimes you have to redefine the way how you view it. I've been with clients that have been doing that, and one way to slice it is to say, look, we could see that the functionality that you need to build for the car to drive in city and in local rural area could be basically a product from the customer perspective, and to drive on the highway would be a different requirement area.
Okay.
That's a way to split it. But again, then there will be different other ways, and it might have all advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I have a probably nice question. I think this is a nice and challenging question.
How do you know before you ask it?
It's challenging in my head,
It's challenging. Okay.
So the question is next, guys. Let's imagine the situation we're adopting less huge in insurance company. I love this example. and we have like 15 teams working on the insurance product as a whole.
Yeah.
And we say, okay, guys.
How many? 15?
15. Let's say 15. It doesn't matter how much. Let's say 15.
Yeah.
And we say, okay, guys, we would like to have areas. We see that it's very hard to manage this scope. Let's break it down. And we say, this, I know, like 6 teams is working in, or 8 teams is working in area calling health insurance, and the rest of the teams is working in area calling car insurance, or something like this. So it looks good. It's still customer centric. It's really focused, right? So you definitely see the value, and it's still covering end-to-end product. But the question is, are we not going to have the situation that we start a local optimization on the level of areas? Because if we have the area and we have X teams there, right, in this area, what if the guy who is like trying to understand what we need to build for health insurance start just to put work just to make sure that the people are busy in this area, more or less with the work? How to avoid this situation? Because it's definitely on the surface, right?
And maybe to add to that, have you seen examples where like teams being allocated, I don't know what's the right word, from an area to an area to actually work as a global optimization method? And yeah, so your experiences with that.
Basically, for me, and I'm sure Wolfgang can add to that, is the fact that yes, once you start splitting, you have always the chance of local optimization, and the bias is there, as I mentioned before. So you have to be very careful with that, and that's why actually in less and less huge, there is only one product owner to give this clear vision, but also to prioritize coarse-grained themes. Yes, on a high level, call it gigantic requirements or whatever, and make sure what is most crucial right now for the customer, for the business, that we should be doing, and this is the person actually who ultimately allocates the teams into the different requirements areas.
Okay.
All right, that's a product owner, and in that case, this is all she will be focusing on. So there is also time that this person usually spends with the team to do go see, and or like practicing go see at Gamba, and inspecting and adapting those higher level themes, but is more involved with deciding the strategies and doing this on a very high level. And then the area products owners are the one that are taking the responsibilities in the sub products, you would say, or in the requirement areas.
Okay. Wolfgang, do you have something to add, remove, or?
Yeah, I think it is very important to understand that the backlog here. How is the backlog structured? So, if you have one product backlog, as it is desired to be, and you still have several areas, then you should have them in the one product backlog, so that there is the transparency on this value, and then you will actually see if some area isn't anymore doing so great, or let's say producing so much value compared to the others. And then again, the product owner has the capability to do that and shift teams around. But did you actually know that there is a difference between less huge and less huge? There is a huge less huge and a not so huge less huge.
Yeah, exactly. Three less huge, basically.
Yeah, and the difference is this: it's simply a matter of practicality. So if you have a product, and I know 2 cases actually which are huge products. You have 3,000, 4,000 people working there in this product. Yeah. Then and you would imagine this just from the numbers. You would then end up, let's say we have even 8 teams, per area, and let's say you have then this would be roughly like 80 teams or 50 teams. Yeah.
Wow.
if you think about 50 teams and 50 areas, yeah, and you have 50 areas now, and you want to have them in one product backlog, I mean, congratulations, but I just think that this is beyond meaning anymore, what you can see, and that you can really do any prioritization. So you have to find other means there. And maybe you have to take another step into a dysfunctional world, meaning that you need to separate actually the area product backlogs, you know, into an own one, because, or maybe you can still combine a few of them. But in the end, it is still actually one product what they are delivering. And this is the amazing thing. So this is a huge stretch for the organization to get this done. Yeah. And so in this way, the recommendation certainly is that avoid the separation of the area backlogs as much as possible, because you will be one step more towards a dysfunctional setup. Yeah. And it will strengthen the local optimization even more if you do it like that.
So that's why you actually have still one backlog. That's super important, right? That to understand that there is still one product backlog. And the area product backlogs are just different views on this product backlog, which makes the work extremely difficult. So are just different filters, ways to view the same product backlog and prioritize.
I just added the backlog screenshot, let's say like this, from LeSS website explaining this with like one product backlog list items with the product requirements area associated with it.
Yeah. And let's not be too much in the extremes here. It is not helpful. So a product in which really 3,000-4,000 people are working on, they are very, very rare on this planet anyway.
Yeah.
So there are just a few which are really doing this. So let's not worry about how to do it there. There are zillions of other problems. Yeah. So, but if you want to look at the majority of the cases, it is the less is enough, and then for a few more you need less huge, and you have maybe a handful of requirement areas, and you will be perfectly fine off with those.
Okay.
I think
so. Sorry.
One thing, Alexei, maybe you discussed this in the previous session,
fine.
but like something that is you mentioned before, you know, you talk with product owners and they say, oh, how can I manage? How can I handle 8 teams? I can barely handle one, you know, and that's something that's super important in our trainings, to make sure that this understanding of what the product owner does is cleared up, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you usually have this kind of 2 key information flows of direction and details.
Okay.
And you don't do any kind of details as a product owner in Scrum and in LeSS, right? So you help the core responsibility as a product owner is really to focus on the direction and prioritization, where to go next, what to do, the vision, and the relationships, basically, you know, internal and external with stakeholders and so on. And that's everything else should be delegated or not done by a product owner. That's super important. So things like clarification and so on, those are things that the team members should do themselves.
Okay, so before we dive into the role of the product owner, I would like to mention one thing. Is that I read, like, we've talked about what were the examples of the areas, and you guys gave us pretty cool examples, right? Recently, I read somewhere, and I think I've also heard it on a LeSS conference from BMW talk, that they had really hard time figuring out what would be the areas, so they just go with like blue, green, orange, or ABC. Right. So, and I think I start to hear that more often than before. I think Evgeny, even you seem to have such case with your client in Belarus. Like, your areas are just blue, red, orange, and whatever makes sense in the current days fit in this area. You guys, Wolfgang and Robert, do you see this as a like new emerging pattern that helps to serve for global optimization, so people don't get attached too much to their domain and to requirement? Have you seen that in your cases? just as an experiment?
I don't know about you, Wolfgang, but I think one, as you mentioned, I mean, there's a couple of reasons why you want to, like, you have to grow from less to less huge. Yeah? As you said before, it's when one product owner cannot manage the product backlog anymore, and the meetings get too crowded. And another reason is the lacking of focus. And that's where I think it's super important that you have some kind of focus in these areas. If you do A, B, C, red, green, yellow, it still has to be quite clear where are we trying to go, because you have your regular sprint review, the sprint planning, where you talk about those important things, talk about the vision and are we developing our product in that direction that we want to do it. And this helps. I mean, there's a whole discussion about sprint goals and so on, and when to use it, and can you use it in less and so on, which gets offside. But at the end, this focus is super important for teams that you know what they are trying to work on. And if you work on multiple, like if that's a such huge product, then you want to give each area some kind of focus. And it can be, it can be found in different ways. But from my perspective, it helps when you find a clear focus there and keep those in a manageable format. So you have not more than this magic number that Wolfgang said about the 8 teams. But once you see that there is not that many teams needed, then you see it doesn't make sense to have a requirement area with less than 4 teams. So you like to shift them, but still keep kind of focus. So you always have to think about the focus. In my perspective, that's my experience.
Okay.
I mean, about the naming, you ask about the naming. So I see 2 things. If you name the requirement areas like, for example, health insurance and vehicle insurance, and then what happens is that if this name is sticking too much, then the guys will say, but we are the health insurance guy. I don't know anything about the vehicle insurance. And then, yeah, but come on, you are using the same tools, most likely same language and stuff like this. The same business logics are there. So there might be a risk that the people are more hesitant to change, or they are more resisting if the PO would say, hey guys, we need now more support in the vehicle insurance, and we take one team from health insurance section. On the other hand, if you take neutral names, that would be maybe less of an issue. So I'm red, now I'm blue. Who cares? Maybe if you use Harry Potter's names like the houses, Gryffindor and Slytherin, already this might be too much. You never know. And then on the other hand, I think it has to be a meaningful thing. So that the question is that maybe in the beginning it might be easier for people to understand. Hey, now we do something different. And this is the area of health insurance. So this is what I'm doing. I can identify myself with this. So in this way, it's a question also of the organizational maturity. So if you are maybe more mature, then you can maybe live with both names. If you are less secure, then I really don't know. It really depends. And actually, I would like to let the people also decide. Involve the people in this decision, because they have to live with it for some years. So maybe they have a great insight, and it's again one way more to build the self-management organization. Involve the people and say, okay, guys, this is basically the content. So I'm fully with Robert on the focus. So this is the content of this area. But how should we name it now? And make the people aware of these problems and this, teach them system thinking in a way that, okay, if we do this, it might be this. And, if they are aware of it, it might not even happen, this local optimization.
Okay. Sounds good. So we spent like half an hour on the topic of the areas, and I think we elaborated quite nicely on that topic. One sub-theme of Let's Huge that I'd like to dive now is the role of the product owner and the area product owner, and how those people work together, right? So from my understanding, there's add-on, right, on the left side of a Let's Huge picture, a product owner and the number of area product owners. It's like a new dimension which is being added to Let's Huge. So I know this one is called product owner team, right, or product owners team, whatever we call it. So like, what's the magic behind these people? Like how they work? I mean, Let's Huge doesn't add any specific meetings for them, right? So I guess it's all left to them to figure it out. But one thing I've heard on the LeSS trainings, which I've done, which I've been attending as a participant, is like there's no portfolio management in LeSS, right? So these guys are just they're doing the lean operation because there's one backlog. They don't have to do classical portfolio management. So I guess my question is, what is the alternative to Let's Huge? Can you have like number of LeSSes and portfolio management on top? If not, if yes, what are pros and cons? And of course, your answer will be no, it's inefficient, it's wasteful. But then the question is, how the product owner team, these four guys on the picture which we are showing on our streaming, how this product owner and the three area product owners managing the work together, how they actually do it, like how much actually time they spend together. Are there any meetings they do, any ceremonies? Do they have a special board? Do they have dailies? Like please open up the curtain to the world of this product owner team, because it's not something which is well described in literature and in articles.
Okay. I have plenty of comments to this. It's a very nice question.
Okay.
So first of all, I think we need to understand that between the requirement areas, there are no dependencies. Mm-hmm. And that would mean that because there are no dependencies, there's actually no need for any kind of portfolio management of any kind. So you have one product backlog and you take the items basically from there. And so if you think of portfolio management, this typically means that you have to do decisions about resourcing or stuff like this, and this really isn't meaningful here. Mm-hmm. So it would be a complete overhead in my point. Now about this interface about product owner and area product owner, it's actually quite funny. I have seen two different ways where the product owner did not delegate anything at all. Mm. So this means actually the product owner was in the sprint reviews, the product owner was in the overall retro and of the requirement areas, and basically overruling the APOs. So it was a very, very dysfunctional setup. Okay. And the APOs were more than frustrated. Then on the other hand, I have seen that the product owner was really letting go, and the area product owners really took over the business. So they did all the decisions, and then the product owner was just looking that it's basically going in the desired direction. So if there was any need for escalation, then basically the product owner was coming into the game. And there, the product owner was doing really what he or she is supposed to do, focusing on the overall business. So this means that exploring new markets, answering questions, do we go with our health insurance to China or not? Do we go with our life insurance to Switzerland or not? Or to the States? So answering this kind of big questions, that's then still the job of the product owner in this way. And so there I have seen both these setups. And then it was so that in one case, they were first running pretty much alone without sync meeting. And then there was the clear need coming from the area product owners. Please, we need our daily, we need to sync just to see how the business is going. And so they actually had then established a daily, some half an hour meeting, and then basically they could exchange themselves. And this was not a reporting meeting, but this was just an exchange on how things are going, because it was quite dynamic. And about the sync meetings or meetings, there is no official meeting mentioned as such in LeSS. But if you think about the practical point of view, so that typically after sprint review, when sprint review is over, then very often I have seen the area product owners and the product owner coming together and looking how the sprint actually went, and then making decisions, okay, what do we take on from now, and how will the sprint planning the next day look like? So they use typically this time where the teams have their own retros to sync themselves and see how the review actually went, learn from this one, and then adapt in the next sprint accordingly. And that's actually also mentioned in the LeSS books. Yeah,
exactly. That's my same experience that I have. We had some like a pre-sprint product owner team meeting. Just one to make sure. Yeah, that's the term is product owner team, not product owners team, because there is actually only one product owner.
Okay.
And yes, that's where they use the time to align and coordinate, but coordinate in the meaning as Wolfgang described. What is the most important things to do, and is there maybe should we focus more on those bigger themes or on other things? So that's where the product owner comes in and supports in terms of coordination, and maybe it makes sense again, like to shift teams around, but we don't want to do that like all the time, especially of the reason of focus that Wolfgang mentioned before, to constantly shift the and change the areas. Yeah, it's funny you said, are there alternatives? I guess, of course, there are alternatives of doing that. You could do less with some you could even have Scrum teams and the portfolio management on top. That's called SAFe.
Happens everywhere, right? Yeah, that's called SAFe. That's true.
So yeah, there are alternatives, but I don't see alternatives or haven't figured out alternatives if you want to keep the same goals for system optimization, like adaptability and customer value.
Okay.
Then working with less and less.
Mm-hmm. All right. So
what I have also seen where the sync meeting was really helping was, for example, if you imagine that you have a customer has a problem, that's why they come to the organization, and now they define the goal maybe for this release. This is what we want to achieve here, and from this they define the scope and the actual requirements. Now maybe it has been so that one area says, oh, by the way, it's getting really tight in my area. And then it is so that maybe, okay, hey, I can help you out. And then you get actually the first sentence of the manifest for agile software development. Yeah, we create a product by helping each other. And this is where this really kicks in. So done by another requirement area, maybe not as good. I mean, in sense of as fast, or maybe they can only do 80% of it or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So still adding the customer value, but they have maybe still some competence. And I have really seen this one that there were generic items which has to be done anyway, and any of the requirement areas could do. So then I have also seen a nice dynamic here that people say, okay, this needs to be done. Who is going to do this? Who is volunteering for this? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then they looked at their plans and they said, okay, it seems to be that for me it fits. And because the competences were also in place, that was okay. That seems to make sense now. And then of course they were checking this with the teams, yeah, and then say, okay, does this really fit for you also, and so on.
You just mentioned this generic requirement. So I didn't mean to ask this question, but because you mentioned that, it came to my mind. Like, so we have these requirement areas, which are verticals, which are customer facing. it is true, right, that actually some systems or subsystems or components can actually cut across all the areas, or rather all areas can be cutting across
Absolute,
these
yeah.
systems, right? So it's absolutely not a must or not a consideration of an area to make sure it contains all the systems or services that needs for this area, right? So like in insurance, you might have a backend right across all insurances.
Yes.
So it will be then maintained and developed by all areas and all teams in all areas, right? Is it like this?
Correct.
That is the ideal case, so that everybody can actually touch the backend and really do the changes there.
Okay.
And so it was actually in this one case. So they were literally running out of numbers. Yeah, I can make the example. So they had they could have up to 9,999 customers or clients. Yeah, and now they said, okay, with this new customer, we will go beyond 10,000. So how do we solve this? Yeah, and I said, okay, now we have to figure out a way. And any of the teams had the competence to do this. So then, okay, some organization or some requirement areas volunteered, and they did this basically. Yeah, so that would be a typical example of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last press conference, of looking into it, if you have in your organization so that really makes sense how to deal with this and how to organize it. Yeah.
Okay, so we guys spent 50 minutes almost, or a bit even more, talking about the picture, right? We have on the screen describing the intentions behind the less huge and way how it works. Let's spend maybe up to 10 minutes or so speaking about the dynamics, like how you actually grow an organization into less huge, right? I think you've mentioned the word growing today. So like, how do you actually do we spoke with the Gene Gendel on the first podcast about the generic ideas of less adoption and why we need to actually have less adoptions and how you would actually go about that. But how would you go about less huge adoption? Like, what's your story? Like, is it area by area? Have you seen cases where you come up with several areas? Have you seen areas growing and then merge? Like what's the dynamic? It's probably a story of several years at least in the company, right? Because it's very slow growth. But maybe you can shed some light on actually how you end up in this less huge situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and Wolfgang, you can comment then. I guess, as I mentioned before, like with less, you should put the framework, the rules from the beginning, the structure in place from the beginning, and you should do a deep and narrow adoption over a broad and shallow one. That's one of the three adoption principles, and you don't want to do it to grow it like incremental. With less huge, you have to do it and to grow it, and you have basically two approaches, right? The one is to do like a gradual incremental approach over the whole product group, and that's where you start with the less huge requirement areas, and with time you improve your definition of done or your definition of the product.
Mm-hmm.
And the alternative is to do a more focused deep adoption as part of the product group. And that's where you already have a more stronger definition of done and add requirements areas to your less huge. So you don't start that big, and you meant like or have two requirement areas, and then with time add different parts of the organization into the less huge. And this is what I've experienced. It's something that avoids the pains that the teams usually have with the adoption, but it takes a lot of times. So it take a lot of and yeah, you have to wait which is better in your in your organization. I don't know which one have you experienced, Wolf?
Well, I have seen in my case study, as I will show a little bit more detailed, that we did a less huge basically all at once, but it was not so huge. It was just a little bit over less. So in this way,
the so-called less huge.
Yes, absolutely. So it was certainly like this. And well, it was a bit edgy, but still, I think it was meaningful at that point of time. Now, another way, if you think about this, that you have your idea to become as adaptive as possible, as flexible as possible in your organization. So then the question is that, okay, if you do something like you have, let's say, one component, and then you think about that, okay, maybe you have two component teams, so you have several component teams, and you now mix those two. So you already broaden this. Okay, now you have maybe instead of 4 component teams, you have already 2 areas in a way of mixed components. And this is actually what the feature team adoption map is aiming at, so that you here gradually change, potentially even in an entire organization, you gradually change there step by step and you grow bigger as you can go along, because this is a huge change. Then typically at some point of time, yes, you will extend the DoD, because now at some point of time system testing makes sense, and so you can gradually grow in the vertical and in the horizontal way, basically. And then, of course, here also I would say that if you have many hundred people in an organization, then I would still try to do this in a smaller scale. This means you take maybe 2 or 3 components and you form one requirement area of those, and then you start working with them. You get experience, you get the positive momentum, you clarify issues, and the rest is still working as before. And then you go to the next one. And then also you will tackle the fear of a product owner that, hey, now all of a sudden I have no problem to handle 6, 7, 8 teams, because now I know it's a different world out there. I can do it now. And so the people and the organization becomes more mature as you go along. And also if you think about this, that you will have, if you do it too broad, the adoption, you will have problems of coaching, and then if you don't pay enough of attention there, and even assuming you don't get so many coaches, they are not available most likely, that you have other dynamics coming into the game, like about the coaching network. So you get into this drama, and then you might get cowboy coaches, what we call them, So Ari is, by the way, having a nice talk about this topic in the XP 2020, so that you get the setup there where the coaches then do whatever they want. So this is getting really dysfunctional, and then in the end, you might want to ask if it is really going the right direction, and maybe not. The wheel is turning, and you actually get worse than before. So that's always a danger then. So if you do too much at once, nothing properly.
Understand. Robert, do you have anything to add to that? Because we're about to wrap up, so maybe last final thoughts and wishes to people trying to go with a less huge and what is huger than less huge adoptions? What do we call them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, yeah, you have the less huge, but this can be also, there's like the one extreme, the huge, less huge, and the other extreme, the less huge, less huge.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you're interested in more about this topic, I will speak at the conference that you guys organized.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for doing that. And I will try to give kind of impression what was for me quite interesting going through one less adoption that was done in a way that it shouldn't be properly done, and what I learned from that, and then being part of a less huge adoption in a frame of time that usually is always too small compared to the times less huge adoption takes. But the learnings, the things that I found out very difficult to handle, and this is what I would like to talk about in my talk, to see maybe some tips, things that can happen actually in less huge adoption, what Scrum Masters usually tend to do, and what works well, what doesn't work. So, or at least in my experience, some tips that I found, things that you can try and what shouldn't.
Sounds cool.
Avoid.
Really looking forward to that. Wolfgang, what would be your talk about?
Yeah, so I will talk about less huge adoption in an insurance company. And yes, so this was also very challenging. We let's say, misread some of the guidelines or ignored them kindly and did our own way there. And I will also talk about actually how we have defined the product, and what was the product in the end, what were the requirement areas, and then also what did it mean, and so what has happened in this organization, and yes. And then also I will summarize then basically what really went positive and what went negative in this whole thing. And why some of these guidelines, what we have, are really to be followed in a way, so that don't just ignore them. And the first guideline is this one: if you can ignore, or if you can do without less huge, then do without less huge.
Okay, avoid it as much as possible. Right.
Yes.
Makes sense. I think it's a very nice note to finish our streaming with. Just to remind everybody, these series of podcasts are just warm-ups for our last day Europe conference happening online 15, 16, 17 June, 4 hours a day on the afternoons of European time. I'm sure everybody who's interested will be able to join, and we're going to have really great speakers sharing their stories and case studies, so stay tuned. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us today and sharing your stories. Let's simplify this world. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
I can stop you for a second because we start getting questions in chat.
Oh no! Too late!
Too late!
No,
it was a fixed scope project.
I will give a shot on one question. Okay, I will give a shot on. We actually didn't speak about this, but the question is really relates to LeSS and it's really focused. Like
these guys ruined my plan.
Yes, but sometimes you cannot control plans. So no one knew that's going to be coronavirus like 3 months ago, right? The question is next. Is there any Scrum Master in scope of whole LeSS who is actually making the the system improvement, as far as I can understand from the question? So is there any the guy who is trying to coordinate everything from the Scrum Master process side in less huge?
The less master.
Huge less master.
Yeah. And if it's huge, then it's a huge less Scrum Master.
Yeah. No, I mean, yes, I have heard rumors of Uber Scrum Master or stuff like this. No, there is no such thing in LeSS. So basically, it is so that if you also think about that, you have, let's say, in a setup of 8 teams, you would have maybe 3 or 4 Scrum Masters. It is, for example, only one which is then working more closely together with the product owner. So of course the product owner might not want to hear or get coached from 4 different people. This might be a bit too much. But then again, the Scrum Masters are working together. They are talking to each other.
Amazing.
It's amazing. They talk to each other. Yes, it's amazing. Yeah, it's the extreme, and then also maybe in the overall retro, which is the place and time to improve the system, they are coming together and also bringing their insights into this event. Then,
and that's actually one thing that I will talk about exactly about this kind of things that happen. That usually, as Wolfgang said, you need. Sometimes there is more support for the Scrum for the product owner and usually for the product owner team to be to have meaningful sessions, and then you pick one Scrum Master who helps the product owner team, and the product owner gives them improvement feedback and so on. But what often I've seen happen then this if this is the same person who also supports teams, then they usually tend not to spend enough time with the teams, which is often missing. So you have to be very careful about that, and also in LeSS we believe that a Scrum Master can support 2 to 3 teams if the teams are already used to Scrum and LeSS, and you have to and you want to have them and sometimes it's actually good if they are part of different requirements area, but you don't want to do this from the start. That's something that I will also dig on in my talk.
Because in my experience, actually, it has been also so that the Scrum Masters, they didn't know how to organize events, for example, with many teams. So they were very good Scrum Masters for 1 or 2 teams, but everything beyond this, they had really trouble with. So they needed to learn a lot also, like how to deal with this thing. And then in this way, so this takes a little bit of time, and then they should stick within one requirement area just to learn this within one requirement area. But then, yes, I agree that then maybe later on, if they're more experienced, they can go across the requirement areas, and then actually you have this automatically inbuilt in the system.
Correct.
And this is what you actually are aiming for in the long run. I would also like to highlight that in the if you look at the typical org chart, which we have illustrated in the LeSS material, in LeSS Huge you will find a box for competences and coaching. So here is the idea that the Scrum Masters, for example, and maybe you have even a thing called Agile Coach or anything like this, yeah. So all this kind of people who are supporting the organization would actually be in there and really having a good exchange on ideas and status where we are with the overall product.
I want to add one small thing for those who's really interested in how Scrum Masters works in LeSS. Next week I will host the event with the Scrum Masters from PandaDoc. That's going to be 3 Scrum Masters who's working right now in LeSS adoption, and they will share how they actually working with couple of teams, each of them. It's 11 teams scale, so that's going to be the interesting discussion for those who want to join us from the stream. We will announce this very soon, and you can jump in and ask any questions related to Scrum Masters, education, scaled events, stuff around this.
Sounds cool. If there are no more questions, it's time to shut down the streaming, and the recording will be available on the same link for people watching us on YouTube. thank you guys again to spend with us this evening. No more staying between you and your families or your beers, whatever is your top priority item.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys, everybody. And
Great
wash your
Thanks so
hands.
much.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
It was fun.